Today we're going to show you how to tune up the smoke unit in the typical post-war steam engines, such as this Lionel 736 Berkshire. We'll begin by opening the locomotive up and getting the smoke unit out where we can see it. We'll open it up, exposing the original smoke unit. And if you look down inside this smoke unit, you can see that it's a nichrome wire wound around a piece of Bakelite plastic. We're going to replace this smoke unit with the more modern style that uses the liquid smoke rather than the old pellet style. To do this, we first have to unsolder the two leads that come from the nichrome wire smoke unit. We're going to lift the old smoke unit out now. And in order for you to see how the old unit worked compared to the new one, let's take this one out of the cap. I'm going to bend this up, pull the insulation off the wire, and take the old smoke unit out of its steel cap on top. Here is the smoke element, and you can see the nichrome wire wrapped around the Bakelite plastic. Now, this sat right here in the top of the smoke unit. When the smoke unit was assembled, we saw that the hole was directly above it. The smoke pellet was placed in the hole, and it laid on top of this wire until it melted and became liquid. That liquid would then be burnt, creating the smoke, and what wasn't burnt would fall back into this reservoir. The unique thing about the Lionel smoke pellets were that when they cooled, they crystallized. That allowed a child to pick up the locomotive and turn it over without anything hot falling out of it. The problem with today's locomotives and today's smoke elements is that we can no longer have those smoke pellets because the chemical compound that made that pellet up had one or more chemicals which are no longer allowed to be in the hands of children. So in today's world, the smoke element is a heater coil that heats and burns a very thin film oil. We'll show you how to change this smoke unit out over to the more modern one. Here are the old parts. You can see the post-war smoke unit and the steel cap. And then over here are the parts that you need to purchase. And it's a heater coil, a wick, and a plastic cap. It's important that you get a plastic cap rather than a metal one for this conversion. When you get the heating element, it'll be in a straight line like this. You need to bend the wire to a 90-degree point to the heater core on both sides. We're going to take the wick now and slide it over the wire on the heating element, and we'll have to position it so that it goes around the corner and completely covers the heating element like so. Now we'll take the heating element with the wick and the plastic cap. We take the heating element with the wick, insert it into the plastic cap, and push it all the way up so that it sits nicely in the cap. Also, at this time, take the time to fluff out the end of the wick so that it will pick up the oil from the reservoir a little bit better. Should look like this. Then the last thing to do before you go on to your next operation is to hold it tightly up against the bottom of the cap and bend the wires over so that it won't fall out of the cap for your next operation. Then the next step that we're going to do is we're going to place this assembly on top of the old metal reservoir, snapping it down in place so that it looks like this. The ground wire is soldered in place now. The next thing we need to do is trim off the excess wire that comes out past the solder joint from the heater. The next thing we need to do is to bend this wire down out of the way of the body of the locomotive when we put it on, like this. The other side is a little bit more important, and there's something that we have to point out that needs to be done here. When we do this side, this is the wire that comes from the collector roller or the center rail on the track, and we have to solder it onto this wire so that no part of it extends off the top of this plastic cap. So what we'll do is we'll bend this wire around so that it stays over the top of the cap like this, and then we'll cut the wire first so that no part of that wire extends off of the plastic cap. Now let's tin the wire that comes from the heating coil so that we can solder the wire from the collector roller right onto it. And we'll solder it on, making sure that no part of that wire or solder joint extends past the black plastic, like that. The last thing we're going to do is to put this little piece of insulation on top of the cap. To do that, we need to put a spot of glue on the cap, place the insulation on top like this. The reason for this insulation is to make sure that our solder joint for the hot wire doesn't short out against the engine's metal casting when we put this back together. The next important thing that we need to check is to make sure that the air pump on the smoke unit is operating properly. If you take a close look, you'll see that there is this portion of the air pump, and there's a cam on the axle of the front wheels that moves this follower and this arm up and down, creating the air pumping action. There you can see it going up into and out of the bottom of the smoke unit. We're going to check the travel of that cap to make sure that it gets a full stroke up into and back out of the smoke unit. That's the way you get the maximum amount of air and therefore the maximum amount of smoke coming out of the chimney. The first thing we're going to do is remove the smoke unit assembly that we just put together, lift off the air pump cap, and let's look at the lever. We can pull it out easily. And let's take a look at the cam follower, which is located in a slot right here in the casting. This cam follower oftentimes is nothing but a piece of phenolic that has to freely travel up and down in that slot. Most of the time it has survived all these years traveling fine, but sometimes you'll find some grease or some foreign material in there which will cause the follower to hang up in the slot and therefore produce no air into the smoke unit. Now that we see the cam follower is traveling properly in its slot, let's put the lever back in place and put the air cap back on. We're going to reassemble the smoke unit, and we're going to check the travel on the pump cap to make sure that we're getting the maximum stroke and therefore the maximum amount of air in the smoke unit. Now let's watch that air pump cap and see if its travel is such that we're getting the best possible flow. And what we see in this case is that it doesn't travel completely up, even at the top of that cam lobe. We check that by seeing that there's that much more travel that we're missing every time. So this smoke unit's only given us about 50% of the air that it could possibly give if we adjust this lever. Now let's remove the smoke unit so that we can get to this lever, and we're going to adjust this lever by bending it right here, because this is the point where the cam follower pushes the lever up. We're going to re-bend this cam lever so that we get the most vertical travel we can out of that cap, creating the most air and therefore the most smoke. We're going to bend this lever so that this part of the lever is higher when we're done. And in order to do that, we're going to bend it right where it rests on the cam follower. So it's lifted out of its slot. Grab it with a pair of long nose here, and bend it slightly cup-shaped like this. We're going to bend it so that it's cup-shaped like this, not like this. Be sure not to bend this too far. This has to be a very subtle difference because the movement of the cap is so far ahead of the bend that you don't have to bend this much to get a great deal of vertical travel out of the cap. Now let's put the lever back in and put the air pump cap back on and put our smoke unit assembly back in place. Now let's check the travel of the air pump cap and make sure that it closes completely into the chamber as the wheel turns. Oh, that's much better. That'll give us about a 50% improvement in our airflow and therefore a 50% improvement in the smoke. Okay, we've got the cab and the frame assembled. let's do one thing. Let's check to make sure that, yeah, okay, the holes line up perfectly between the smoke unit and the casting smokestack. Now let's take it out on the layout and see how it works. There are many different makers of smoke fluid. There's Lionel, there's LGB, and there are others. It's been my experience that LGB smoke fluid seems to burn the whitest and the cleanest. With these new smokers, it's also important to note that you must keep fluid on them, because if you don't, they will very easily burn out. Now, that's not a big issue. You'll have to replace it, and they're about $1.50 or so to replace, but you just avoid the labor of doing that if you keep the liquid on the smoke element. Well, let's see how we did. Let's see how that system looks when it goes up the hill. Well, we've got a real smoker now.